Imagine walking down the aisle on the happiest day of your life, surrounded by everyone you love. Then, in a single heartbeat, you vanish without a trace. No struggle, no clues, just a single white rose left behind. For 6 long years, your family searches, your town whispers, and the world believes you're gone forever. But then, you suddenly reappear, wearing the same wedding dress, believing it's still your wedding day. You have no memory of the last 6 years. None. So what happened? Where were you? And who is the mysterious quiet man you keep whispering about in your sleep? The answer is more terrifying than anyone could have ever imagined. To uncover the full, shocking truth of this real-life mystery, you have to watch until the very end. Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on, because you will not want to miss what we found. The air inside St. Michael's Church on June 13th, 1981, smelled of too many lilies and nervous sweat. Sunlight, thick and golden, streamed through the stained glass, painting colored patterns on the anxious faces of the guests. Everyone who was anyone in the small town of Oak Haven, Oregon, was packed into the polished wooden pews. Robert Hayes, 25, handsome in his rented tuxedo, shifted his weight from foot to foot near the altar, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple despite the cool stone of the church. His best man, Dave Miller, clapped him on the shoulder. "Easy, Robbie. She's coming." But the minutes ticked past 2 p.m., the appointed hour. A low murmur began to rise from the congregation, replacing the soft organ music. Outside, waiting in her father's vintage Cadillac, Sarah Hayes, soon-to-be Sarah Hayes, smoothed the ivory satin of her wedding gown for the 100th time. Her bouquet of white roses and lilies trembled slightly in her hands. Her mother, Edith, fussed with the delicate lace veil pinned into Sarah's dark, carefully styled curls. "You look perfect, darling," Edith whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Sarah offered a small, nervous smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was known for her steadiness, Sarah, a kindergarten teacher, loved for her calm patience. But today, the nerves were a live wire under her skin. "Just butterflies, Mom," she murmured. Biggest day. At 2:07 p.m., witnessed by her maid of honor, Lucy Peterson, Sarah exited the Cadillac. The photographer, hired from Portland, snapped furiously as Sarah gathered her long train, her father offering his arm. The walk towards the church doors felt endless. The guests inside quieted, sensing the bride's approach. The organ swelled into the familiar bridal march. The heavy oak doors swung open. But only Edith and Sarah's father, Arthur, entered. Their faces were masks of confusion. Arthur scanned the crowd, his expression crumbling. "Where is she?" he mouthed silently to Robert. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced Robert's chest. He took a step forward. "Sarah," his voice, amplified by the sudden silence, echoed strangely. Lucy Peterson rushed back outside, returning seconds later, pale and shaking her head. "She was right behind us." She stopped just inside the door to fix her veil. "I thought she was following." Chaos erupted. Guests spilled out of the church into the bright June sunshine. Men in suits fanned out across the manicured church lawn, calling Sarah's name. Women huddled together, voices hushed and fearful. The photographer stood dumbfounded, his camera hanging uselessly by his side. The only trace of Sarah Hayes was found near the side entrance to the church's small vestibule, leading towards the restrooms. A single white rose, fallen from her bouquet, lying pristine on the worn stone step. Inside the single-stall ladies' restroom, the small window above the sink was closed and latched from the inside. No skoof marks, no signs of struggle. It was as if Sarah Hayes, 23 years old, beloved teacher, radiant bride, had simply dissolved into the humid afternoon air between the church door and the sanctuary. Oak Haven Police Department, led by Chief Hank Morrison, a man more accustomed to dealing with stolen bicycles and bar fights than vanishings, arrived swiftly. Search parties combed the surrounding woods and fields. Dogs were brought in. They picked up Sarah's scent strongly near the church entrance, and then it vanished completely near the curb, as if she'd stepped into a car. But no one remembered seeing an unfamiliar vehicle parked illegally. Friends and family were interviewed, alibis checked. Robert Hayes, naturally the first suspect, had an ironclad alibi. He'd been in the church, surrounded by dozens of witnesses, since well before the ceremony was due to start. Sarah's parents were devastated, bewildered. There were no arguments reported, no cold feet expressed. Sarah had seemed genuinely excited, nervous but happy, right up until she vanished. The days bled into weeks. Flyers with Sarah's smiling face, her engagement photo, plastered every shop window, telephone pole, and bulletin board in Oakhaven and neighboring counties. The case made regional news. Mystery of the vanishing bride. Tips flooded in, hundreds of them. Reported sightings in Portland, Seattle, even as far as San Francisco. None panned out. Divers dragged the murky bottom of Miller's Pond on the edge of town. Nothing. Cadaver dogs searched vast tracts of forest. Nothing. Sarah Hayes, in her elaborate wedding dress, had disappeared without a single concrete clue. The white rose became a haunting symbol, pressed carefully into the police file labeled Hayes Disappearance, 1981 to 0613. Months turned into years. The intense search faded into a cold case, a painful, open wound in the heart of Oakhaven. Robert Hayes, hollow-eyed, eventually moved away. Sarah's parents aged prematurely, their grief a constant companion. The wedding photograph, Sarah luminous in her gown, remained a fixture in the local newspaper office, a reminder of the town's enduring mystery. Life moved on, but the shadow of June 13th, 1981, never truly lifted. The question hung heavy in the quiet Oregon air. What happened to Sarah Hayes? Then, on a rain-lashed Tuesday evening, October 27th, 1987, 6 years, 4 months, and 14 days after Sarah vanished, the phone rang at the Oakhaven Police Department. The night desk sergeant, Bill Henderson, picked up, expecting another noise complaint. The voice on the other end was high-pitched, frantic. It belonged to Marge Tully, the night cashier at the Fill and Go gas station just off Interstate 5, about 15 miles north of Oakhaven. "Chief, you got to get someone out here. Right now. There's a woman. She looks terrible lost. She's wearing, oh God, she's wearing a wedding dress. A filthy, torn wedding dress. And she keeps saying her name is Sarah. Sarah Hayes. She says she's getting married today." Henderson dropped his coffee mug. It shattered on the linoleum floor. "Sarah Hayes? Are you sure, Marge?" "Sure as I'm standing here. She looks like hell, but it looks like her. From the pictures. Please hurry." Within minutes, Chief Morrison himself, older now, his hair grayer, but the memory of that day burning bright, was speeding through the downpour towards the Fill and Go, lights flashing silently. His heart hammered against his ribs. It couldn't be. It was impossible. A hoax? A cruel trick? Yet, Marge Tully wasn't the hysterical type. He pulled up to the harsh fluorescent lights of the gas station. Through the streaming window, he saw Marge behind the counter, her face pale, and sitting slumped on the floor near the chip rack, leaning against the coolers, was a figure that stopped the chief's breath. She was painfully thin, skeletal almost, draped in what was unmistakably the tattered, mud-stained remnants of an ivory satin wedding gown. The lace was ripped, the train frayed and filthy. Her dark hair, matted and lank, hung around a face that was gaunt, etched with deep lines of exhaustion and confusion, yet undeniably familiar. It was the eyes that clinched it for Morrison. Haunted, terrified, but the same clear, intelligent hazel eyes that stared out from the missing person posters that still hung, faded, in his office. She flinched as the door chime rang, shrinking back against the coolers, wrapping thin arms around herself. Morrison approached slowly, kneeling a few feet away, his voice gentle but urgent, official. "Miss, can you tell me your name?" She looked up, her gaze darting around the small store like a trapped animal. Her lips, cracked and dry, moved silently for a moment before a hoarse whisper emerged. Sarah Hayes." She swallowed, wincing as if it hurt. I think I'm lost. I need to get to the church. It's my wedding day. Robert. Robert is waiting. Chief Hank Morrison stared at the ghost of Sarah Hayes, sitting on a dirty gas station floor in a ruined wedding dress, claiming the date was June 13th, 1981. The impossible had happened. She was back. But where had she been for over 6 years? And why did she think no time had passed at all? The mystery had just deepened into something far stranger and more unsettling than anyone in Oakhaven could have ever imagined. The vanished bride had returned, carrying only the clothes she disappeared in and a terrifying void where 6 years of her life should have been. The fluorescent lights of Oakhaven General Hospital hummed with an unnatural brightness, casting stark shadows on the sterile walls of the small examination room. Sarah Hayes sat rigidly on the edge of the gurney, the thin hospital gown hanging loosely on her shockingly thin frame. The ruined wedding dress, carefully bagged as evidence, lay on a nearby chair, a grim monument to the impossible. Chief Morrison stood just inside the door, his presence large and solid, trying to project calm he didn't feel. Dr. Ellen Pierce, a woman with kind eyes and a weary professionalism, moved slowly around Sarah, her touch gentle as she checked vital signs, examined bruises, old yellowed ones and newer, angry purple marks, and a network of fine scars tracing pale lines across her skin. "Sarah," Dr. Pierce said softly, her voice barely above the rustle of her lab coat. "Can you tell me where you've been? Where you hurt yourself?" Sarah flinched slightly at the direct question. Her gaze remained fixed on the speckled linoleum floor, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I don't understand," she whispered, her voice still. "Rough and used. I was just at the church, St. Michael's, with Mom and Dad and Lucy. I was fixing my veil. The wind caught it. Her brow furrowed in intense concentration, then smoothed into blank confusion. Then the lights. Bright lights. And cold. So cold. And the man with the quiet voice. She shuddered violently, wrapping her arms tightly around herself. "He said it was for my own good. That Robert. Robert couldn't have me." Tears welled in her haunted hazel eyes, spilling over onto hollow cheeks. "Where is Robert? Why isn't he here? Is he angry? Did I ruin the wedding?" Dr. Pierce exchanged a heavy look with Chief Morrison. The physical evidence was stark. Severe malnutrition, signs of prolonged physical restraint, deep, abraded grooves around her wrists and ankles, partially healed. Older fractures, poorly set, in 2 ribs and her left forearm. Evidence of repeated injections, likely sedatives or nutrients, clustered near her left shoulder. And the mental state, profound disorientation. Amnesia encompassing the entire 6-year gap. Her reality was frozen at 2:07 p.m. on June 13th, 1981. "Robert isn't angry, Sarah," Dr. Pierce assured her gently, placing a reassuring hand on her bony shoulder. Sarah flinched again, but didn't pull away. He's just very far away right now. You've been unwell. You need to rest." Chief Morrison stepped forward slightly. "Sarah," this man with the quiet voice, "can you describe him? Anything at all? What he looked like? What he wore?" Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, trembling. "Dark," she breathed. Everything was dark. His voice soft, like gravel underwater. He smelled like old books. And something sharp. Chemicals. Like medicine." She opened her eyes, wide with fresh terror. He said he loved me, that he'd always watch me, that Robert didn't deserve someone like me." She dissolved into quiet sobs, her body racked with the force of fragmented, terrifying memories that made no sense within the timeline she remembered. News of Sarah's return exploded through Oakhaven like a thunderclap. By dawn on October 28th, 1987, satellite trucks from Portland and Salem news stations crowded the small hospital parking lot. Reporters shouted questions at anyone emerging from the building. Inside, Chief Morrison instituted a strict no-visitor policy. Only essential medical staff and his own detectives were permitted near Sarah's room, guarded by a uniformed officer. Her parents, Arthur and Edith Hayes, arrived, aged by grief, but now trembling with a fragile, disbelieving hope. Seeing their daughter, so changed, so broken, was a devastating shock. Edith collapsed into her husband's arms outside the room, her cries echoing softly in the sterile hallway. Arthur, his face gray, could only stare through the small window at the ghost of his vibrant daughter, muttering, "My baby, what did they do to my baby?" Meanwhile, the forensic examination of the wedding dress began in earnest at the state police lab. The ivory satin was stained with mud, grass, oil, and substances yet to be identified. The lace was ripped in several places, not just frayed. Crucially, nestled deep within the folds of the filthy underskirt, technicians discovered minute traces. Flecks of a specific type of blue-gray industrial paint, particles of concrete dust, and several tiny, dried pine needles of a species common in the Cascade Mountain Range, over 100 miles east of Oak Haven. Most chillingly, sewn clumsily into the hem, almost hidden, was a small, folded piece of newsprint. Carefully extracted, it revealed itself to be a fragment of a classified advertisement section from the Portland Tribune, dated March 15, 1983, nearly 2 years after Sarah vanished. The ad itself was mundane, for used car, but its presence was a bombshell. It meant the dress, and therefore Sarah, had been handled, altered, or accessed after her disappearance. Someone had deliberately placed this fragment there. But who? And why? Back at the hospital, Sarah remained trapped in her nightmare. She recoiled from the calendar on the wall, showing October 1987. The television news, muted but showing footage of the media circus outside her window, confused and frightened her. "Why are they here?" she asked Dr. Pierce plaintively. "It's just a wedding. It's not important." Nurses reported she woke screaming in the night, calling out for Robert, crying about the dark place and the quiet man. Chief Morrison knew time was critical. Sarah's memories, fragmented and terrifying as they were the only direct link to her captor. But forcing her could shatter her fragile psyche. He needed to talk to Robert Hayes. Tracking him down took precious hours. Robert, it turned out, had moved to Chicago, remarried 2 years prior, and had a newborn son. The call from Chief Morrison hit him like a physical blow. "Sarah? Alive?" Robert's voice crackled down the line, thick with disbelief and a torrent of conflicting emotions. Shock, guilt, a resurgence of the old grief, and a dawning horror. "But how? Where? Is she okay?" Morrison kept it brief and professional. "She's physically stable, but in a bad way, Robert. Malnourished. Signs of long-term captivity. The worst part, she has amnesia. She thinks it's still your wedding day. June 13th, 1981. She's asking for you." There was a long, heavy silence on the line, broken only by Robert's ragged breathing. She doesn't know? About the time? About me moving on." The guilt in his voice was palpable. "No, son, she doesn't. And she's terrified. Fragile. We need to know anything that might help us find who did this. Anyone who ever showed Sarah inappropriate attention? Anyone obsessed? Anyone who might have held a grudge against you? Or her?" Robert sounded overwhelmed. "God, Chief, it was so long ago. Everyone loved Sarah. She was a teacher, for Christ's sake. Kids adored her. Parents respected her. I can't think of anyone specific. Maybe Paul Driscoll? He worked at the bank with me. Always made comments about Sarah being too good for a small town. Bit of a loner. Asked her out a few times before we got serious. She turned him down. He got weird about it for a while. Moved away shortly after the wedding, I think. To Portland? But that was years before she vanished. I never suspected. Paul Driscoll. The name sparked a flicker in Morrison's memory. He recalled the initial investigation. Driscoll had been interviewed briefly. Alibi checked out. He'd been confirmed at his new job in Portland on the day Sarah disappeared. He'd seemed awkward but cooperative, expressing shock and sympathy. Nothing concrete. He'd faded into the background of the massive suspect pool. But now, with Sarah mentioning a man who claimed to love her, who felt Robert didn't deserve her, Driscoll fit a disturbing profile. As Morrison hung up, his deputy, Carla Jenkins, burst into his office, her face pale. "Chief, lab just called about the dress fragment. The newsprint? They found something else. Tiny residue on the paper. Traces of chlorpromazine." Morrison frowned. "Chloro what?" "Chlorpromazine," Jenkins repeated, her voice tight. "It's an antipsychotic, a strong sedative, used in psychiatric hospitals, or," she paused, the implication hanging heavy in the air, "or by someone who needed to keep someone very, very quiet for a very long time." The pieces were horrifying, yet maddeningly incomplete. A vanished bride found 6 years later, remembering nothing but fragments of terror. A wedding dress carrying evidence of mountains and industry, and a 2-year-old newspaper clipping. A possible suspect with a history of obsession, now potentially linked to a powerful sedative. And a victim trapped in the past, her body a map of unimaginable suffering, her mind a locked door holding the key to a monster's identity. The quiet man in the dark wasn't just a figment of Sarah's broken memory. He was real, and the hunt for him had just begun, shrouded in the echoes of a wedding day frozen in time. The sterile scent of the hospital corridor couldn't mask the lingering smell of damp earth and despair clinging to Chief Morrison. Paul Driscoll's Portland apartment, scene of an apparent suicide just hours after Sarah Hayes resurfaced, felt less like closure and more like a trap snapping shut. The single gunshot wound, the hastily scrawled note, "I'm sorry." It got out of hand. Not what it seems, the lack of forced entry. It pointed to guilt to an end. Yet, standing over the body, slumped at the cheap kitchen table, the chief felt a cold unease settle in his gut. Too convenient. Too fast. Back in Oakhaven, the news of Driscoll's death sent shockwaves. For the public, it seemed the mystery was solved. A jealous, unstable man, obsessed with the bride, had taken her, held her, and killed himself when she escaped. Case closed. But inside the cramped Oakhaven PD briefing room, the air crackled with unresolved tension. Detective Carla Jenkins slapped photos onto the corkboard. Driscoll's mugshot from a minor trespassing charge years ago, pictures of his sparse Portland apartment, the suicide note under magnification. Forensics confirmed the gun was his, registered, Jenkins stated, her voice tight. Prints on the weapon and the note are his. But look at the note. She zoomed in. Not what it seems. What does that mean? Out of hand how? And the timing? Sarah escapes. And he immediately offs himself? Without trying to run? Without leaving a clearer confession? Morrison paced the image of Sarah. Hayes's skeletal form superimposed over Driscoll's body. The physical evidence from the dress doesn't scream Portland apartment, he growled. Concrete dust? Industrial paint? Mountain pine needles? Driscoll work data entry for an insurance firm downtown. His life was fluorescent lights and paper cuts. Where'd he get access to a place covered in industrial grime, hidden in the mountains? And the chlorpromazine, Dr. Pierce added, joining via speakerphone. It's a controlled substance. How would a low-level office worker get hold of enough to sedate someone regularly for years? Prescription records show nothing. No history of mental health issues requiring it. It doesn't fit. The suicide felt staged. A patsy taking the fall. But why? And for whom? The quiet man Sarah described. Was Driscoll just a puppet? Or was there another predator still hidden, breathing a sigh of relief as the investigation shifted towards a dead man? Sarah remained the fragile key. Under Dr. Pierce's careful guidance, sessions continued, focusing on sensory fragments rather than forcing the terrifying narrative. They avoided direct questions about the quiet man or the dark place, focusing instead on sounds, smells, texture she might recall before the fear fully took hold. One rainy afternoon, October 30th, Sarah sat wrapped in a soft blanket, staring out the hospital window at the gray sky. Dr. Pierce sat quietly beside her, sketching idly on a notepad, a technique to ease tension. It was cold, Sarah whispered suddenly, her voice distant. Always cold. Not like winter cold. Damp cold. Like stone. Her fingers plucked at the blanket. The air tasted old. Stale. Like mushrooms growing under a log. She shivered. And water. I heard water, not a stream, bigger, constant, a rushing sound, like a river, but louder, closer, sometimes a deep thrumming, like a big machine breathing. Under the floor, Dr. Pierce stopped sketching. A machine? Can you describe the sound? Sarah closed her eyes, concentrating fiercely. Low, steady, like a giant heart beating. Vivimum, vivimum. It shook sometimes, made the floor vibrate. She opened her eyes, wide with a sudden, visceral memory, and the smell stronger near the sound. Oil, hot metal, and something else. Sharp, like bleach, but not clean. Dirty bleach. A damp, stone place near powerful, vibrating machinery and rushing water, smelling of oil, metal, and chemicals. An industrial site near a river. The pine needle evidence pointed squarely at the Cascade Mountains, crisscrossed by powerful rivers feeding hydroelectric dams and dotted with old mining operations, abandoned mills, and water treatment plants. Morrison and his team, armed with Sarah's fragmented sensory clues and the forensic evidence from the dress, plunged into maps and records. They cross-referenced locations in the Cascades, near major rivers with known industrial facilities operational or abandoned between 1981 and 1987. The tiny blue-gray paint flecks were matched to a specific corrosion-resistant coating used primarily on heavy machinery in pulp mills and water treatment plants built before 1975. The concrete dust composition suggested older structures, pre-1960s construction. Their search narrowed dramatically. One location kept rising to the top, the abandoned Cascade Falls Pulp and Paper Mill, nestled deep in a steep river gorge about 120 miles east of Oak Haven. It ceased operations in 1978. Its remote location, access to the powerful White River, massive, decaying machinery, and concrete structures dating back to the 1940s fit the evidence profile perfectly. Crucially, state environmental records showed a small, adjacent water filtration plant, run by the county, had remained minimally operational until 1985, maintaining basic flow control for downstream communities. It would have had pumps running constantly, that deep, rhythmic thrumming Sarah described. The plant used chlorination systems, the dirty bleach smell. On November 2nd, 1987, a heavily armed tactical team, accompanied by Morrison and forensic specialists, converged on the derelict mill complex. The sheer scale of decay was oppressive. Towering, skeletal structures of rusted metal loomed against the gray sky. Broken windows gaped like empty eye sockets. The roar of the White River, swollen with autumn rain, filled the air, a constant, thunderous backdrop. The air hung thick with the damp, fungal smell of rotting wood and stagnant water, undercut by the faint, acrid tang of old chemicals. They focused first on the smaller, concrete block structure of the old filtration plant, attached to the main mill like an afterthought. The heavy steel door was chained and padlocked, a shiny new lock contrasting sharply with the rusted chain. Bolt cutters snapped it open. The interior was a tomb of shadows and dripping water. Ancient, grease-streaked pumps sat silent now, but their massive bases showed signs of recent vibration wear. The concrete floor was thick with grime, but distinct scrape marks led toward the heavy metal hatch in the floor, partially obscured by discarded burlap sacks. Morrison's flashlight beam cut through the gloom, catching the glint of the hatch's heavy ring pull. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The air grew colder, damper as they approached. The stench of mildew and something else, something faintly metallic and sour, grew stronger. With a grunt of effort, two officers heaved the hatch open. A wave of frigid, stale air rushed out. Stone steps descended into utter blackness. Flashlights pierced the darkness, revealing a small, crude cellar. Stone walls wept moisture. The floor was packed earth, and in the far corner, illuminated by the dancing beams, was the undeniable evidence of prolonged, horrific captivity. Thick metal rings, bolted deep into the stone wall. Chains ending in heavy, rusted manacles lay coiled on the dirt floor like sleeping snakes. A stained, thin mattress lay nearby, covered by a threadbare blanket crawling with silverfish. A plastic bucket stood in another corner. Empty food cans, beans, soup, their labels faded, littered the ground near the mattress. And tucked just under the edge of the mattress, almost hidden, lay a small, water-stained paperback book, a romance novel Sarah Hayes had been reading in the weeks before her wedding, her name inscribed inside the cover in her familiar, looping handwriting. The silence in the cellar was broken only by the dripping water and the ragged breaths of the officers. They had found Sarah's prison. The physical reality of her 6-year nightmare was more horrifying than any of them had imagined. But the manacles were open. The chains were discarded. Sarah had escaped this tomb. But how? And crucially, the most chilling question remained. If Paul Driscoll was the quiet man, why was his suicide staged? If he wasn't, who had bolted those rings into the stone? Who had chained Sarah Hayes in this riverbed hell? And where was he now? As Morrison shone his light around the grim cell, the beam caught something else, partially buried in the dirt near the mattress. He knelt, brushing away the soil. It was a small, rectangular piece of plastic, snapped in half. A security keycard. Faded, scratched, but the logo was still faintly visible. Not from the pulp mill, nor the county filtration plant. It bore the distinct emblem of the Northwest Biological Research Institute, a high-security private facility located over 200 miles away, rumored to do controversial work. What was a keycard from a cutting-edge biotech lab doing in the dungeon of an abandoned paper mill? The quiet man's shadow grew longer, darker, and infinitely more dangerous. The nightmare wasn't over. It had just taken a terrifying, unexpected turn into a world Sarah Hayes and the Oak Haven PD could never have foreseen. The broken keycard from Northwest Biological Research Institute, NWBRI, felt cold and alien in Chief Morrison's gloved hand, a stark contrast to the damp, primal horror of the river cellar. This sleek piece of plastic technology didn't belong in this stone dungeon. It screamed of a different world, one of sterile labs, locked doors, and secrets buried deeper than Sarah Hayes had been. The discovery sent the investigation hurtling down a terrifying new path, far beyond the small-town obsessions they'd imagined. Back in Oak Haven, the pressure was immense. The public, briefly satisfied with Driscoll's suicide as an answer, now buzzed with renewed fear and morbid curiosity. Sarah, shielded in the hospital, remained trapped in her fractured 1981. Dr. Pierce reported minor progress. Sarah sometimes mentioned the thrumming, stopping abruptly before she ran through the dark, wet woods, guided only by moonlight reflecting on water. This aligned with the power records Carla Jenkins procured. The county filtration plant adjacent to the pulp mill had suffered a catastrophic pump failure on October 26, 1987. The constant vibration Sarah associated with her prison had ceased. Had that failure provided her chance? Had her captor been distracted, fixing the machinery, allowing her to slip her chains and flee into the wilderness? NWBRI was a fortress. Nestled in a remote, forested area near the Washington border, it was known for cutting-edge, privately funded neurological and pharmacological research. Getting access was like cracking a vault. Warrants based on a keycard fragment found in a dungeon were met with icy resistance from Institute lawyers. A discarded access card proves nothing, their lead counsel stated flatly. Thousands exist. Employees lose them. It could have been carried there by wildlife, washed down river. They provided sanitized employment lists. No Paul Driscoll. Morrison needed more. He turned back to Sarah's fragmented memories. The quiet man, who smelled of old books and chemicals. The chlorpromazine residue. NWBRI's research specialties included experimental memory suppression and neuroregressive therapies. A chilling possibility emerged. What if Sarah's amnesia wasn't just trauma? What if it was induced? Dr. Pierce, working painstakingly, began exploring this. During a session focused on the period before the church, Sarah recalled a minor car accident 6 months before the wedding. Whiplash, she murmured. Dr. Vance, he was nice. Gave me something for the dizziness. Said it was new. Helped the brain heal. her brow furrowed. He knew things. About me. About Robert. Asked strange questions. About how much we really knew each other. A name, Dr. Arthur Vance. NWBRI's stone wall cracked. Under intense legal pressure, they confirmed Dr. Arthur Vance, 58, was a leading neurologist and senior researcher specializing in trauma-induced retrograde amnesia and temporal displacement therapy. He'd taken an unexpected leave of absence starting October 27, 1987, the day after the filtration plant failure and the day before Sarah surfaced at the gas station. His access log showed repeated visits to a secure, off-site environmental monitoring station near the White River, grid coordinates placing it directly at the abandoned Cascade Falls complex. Vance also held permits for restricted Schedule II narcotics, including chlorpromazine. The quiet man had a name, a face from a corporate ID photo, sharp features, wire-rimmed glasses, eyes that held a detached, analytical coldness. A nationwide bolo went out for Vance. His Portland apartment was empty, stripped clean. His bank accounts were untouched. He'd vanished as completely as Sarah once had. The manhunt was frantic, but Vance, a meticulous planner, seemed to anticipate every move. He left no digital trail, no credit card usage. He was a ghost. Sarah's physical health slowly improved, but her mind remained a battleground. The reality of 1987 was a constant, terrifying assault. Seeing her parents, aged and weeping, confused her. Mom? Dad? You look tired. News footage of Vance's face triggered paralyzing panic attacks. The quiet man, she'd scream, curling into a ball. His eyes, his quiet eyes. Yet, Dr. Pierce noted disturbing new details emerging as Sarah's body strengthened. He recorded things, Sarah whispered one afternoon, trembling. In a book, a black book, with silver corners. He said he was saving me from a mistake. From Robert. He said he was fixing time. Morrison realized Vance hadn't just imprisoned Sarah. He'd documented his experiment. That black book was the Rosetta Stone, Vance's motive, his methods, his twisted justification. Finding it became critical. A renewed search of the river cellar yielded nothing. Vance's apartment was sterile. Where would a meticulous, arrogant man hide his most precious record? Carla Jenkins had a hunch. The Institute, she argued. He wouldn't risk taking it on the run. He'd hide it in plain sight, somewhere secure he could access, somewhere nobody would think to look for evidence against him. With warrants now backed by Sarah's testimony linking Vance to her captivity, Morrison descended on NWBRI with federal agents. The search was tense, combing through Vance's pristine, impersonal office and lab. Nothing. Then Jenkins noticed it. A small, decorative ventilation grate high on the wall of Vance's private research library, filled with ancient medical texts, the old books smell. It was slightly askew. Behind it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a thick, leather-bound journal with reinforced silver corners. Vance's handwriting was precise, clinical, devoid of remorse. The entry spanned years, starting long before Sarah's abduction. He detailed his fascination with her after treating her whiplash. He saw her engagement to Robert as a profound cognitive error, a deviation from her optimal potential. His research, he wrote, offered a unique opportunity to induce controlled, retrograde amnesia, effectively resetting a subject's consciousness to a point before a perceived traumatic event. In Sarah's case, her commitment to Robert. The wedding day was chosen as the anchor point for the temporal displacement, the moment her mistake became irreversible. The chlorpromazine and other experimental cocktails were to suppress her memory formation during captivity, ensuring the purity of the regression. The river cellar was his environmental immersion chamber, chosen for its sensory isolation and proximity to the filtration plant's vibrations, which, as notes suggested, stabilized the subject's temporal disorientation. He documented her confusion, her terror, her repeated questions about Robert and the wedding, with the detached interest of a scientist observing lab rats. He noted administering drugs, testing her memory retention, meticulously recording her physical decline, all while believing he was her savior. The final entry, dated October 26, 1987, was chilling. Asterisk plant failure. Subject agitated. Temporal stability compromised. Regressive state potentially fracturing. Contingency required. The experiment may be reaching its natural, albeit premature, conclusion. The data, however, remains invaluable. Asterisk. He hadn't planned her escape. He'd been preparing to conclude his experiment permanently. The power failure had saved her life. Vance was never found. Some believed he fled the country. Others whispered he succumbed to the wilderness, a fitting end for a monster. A few unsettling reports surfaced over the years. A man matching his description seen near remote research outposts in Canada, Alaska, even South America, but nothing concrete. The shadow of the quiet man lingered. For Sarah Hayes, the return was a life sentence of a different kind. The Black Book's contents, though confirming her ordeal, offered no healing. The amnesia never fully lifted. She lived with islands of memory. The cold stone, the thrumming, the quiet man's terrifying eyes, adrift in a sea of lost time. She knew, intellectually, that 6 years had been stolen, that Robert had moved on, that the world had changed. But emotionally, a part of her remained forever frozen at 2:07 p.m. on June 13, 1981, eternally poised to walk down the aisle, eternally haunted by the darkness that waited just inside the church door. She moved back in with her aging parents in Oak Haven, a quiet, spectral figure in the town that never forgot. Children who had been in her kindergarten class were teenagers now. The lilies in St. Michael's Church bloomed every June. Sometimes, on rainy evenings, Sarah would stand at her window, staring out at the dripping trees, her fingers unconsciously tracing the faint scars on her wrists. She didn't remember the chains, but her body did. She didn't remember the 6 years, but the void they left shaped every breath. The mystery of her vanishing was solved, the monster identified, but the deeper mystery, the violation of her mind, the theft of her time, the chilling precision of one man's madness, remained a cold, unsettling echo in the Oregon rain. The bride returned, but the woman she was meant to become was lost somewhere in the dark, damp silence between 1981 and 1987, a casualty not just of a captor, but of time itself.